This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends. Hello and welcome back to Evangelical, a show exploring the world inside and outside the evangelical subculture. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. This week's guest is the anonymous blogger Heretic Husband. He tells a story which begins in Catholicism and continues through evangelicalism and agnosticism. This story does include a discussion of spiritual and sexual abuse, so if that is triggering, please bear that in mind. You can read the Heretic Husband story at heretichusband.com, follow him on Twitter at heretichusband, and follow his Tumblr at heretichusband.tumblr.com. If you enjoy the show and want to support it, please rate and review the show on iTunes. Ratings and reviews increase the visibility of the show and will help us continue to grow our audience. As this tempestuous election season draws to a close, I think there will be more people looking for ways to explore ideas around faith and evangelicalism than before, so the more reviews we can get, the more people will have a chance to find this. You can also support the show via Patreon at patreon.com/exevangelicalpod, like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/exevangelicalpod, follow the show on Twitter at exevangelicalpod, and follow the show on Instagram at exevangelicalpod. You can also follow me on Twitter at brchastain. You can find links to some of the things we talk about in the show notes as well. Alright, let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to Evangelical. Today I have with me a blogger who blogs anonymously under the term Heretic Husband at heretichusband.com. And for the sake of anonymity, I'm going to refer to him as Harry throughout the podcast. Welcome, Harry.
Hi, nice to be here.
Thanks very much. Thanks for joining me. So let's kind of get started. To get a little bit about your background, you mentioned on your website that you're actually brought up Catholic. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Italian Catholic, which is even worse. But no, I was baptized. Gosh, when I was probably 2 weeks old. The whole schmeal. First penance, first communion, confirmation. But after that, I sort of started to have my first serious doubts around late high school. But, I kept going to church with my parents every week. I didn't really have much of a choice with that. But then when I went to college, started reading atheist news groups on Usenet, which I don't even know if that's still a thing anymore, but that's how that's what they had back then instead of message boards, really. And of course, none of my friends in college were religious, and, we would talk about stuff like that from time to time, as I think everybody does in college. And that was my first agnostic phase, I guess you could say. I never swung far enough to actually say, yes, I'm an atheist. I think I've just always been uncomfortable with certainty. Mm-hmm. And I can never say, no, there's no God, and anyone who believes in that is stupid. I could see how it could make people do stupid things. I mean, you could all you have to do is open a history book to see that. So then I met my wife, or the woman who was going to be my wife, and we started dating around junior year, and I knew she was a Christian. And then I found out fairly soon before we started dating that her dad was a Baptist pastor. And I didn't really know anything about Protestantism growing up. I had a couple of Protestant friends, but my friends in high school, I never talked to religion about them at all. I did have a best friend who was Unitarian Universalist. I didn't quite get that because he told me he went to see Rocky Horror Picture Show as part of a church activity, and I was like, okay. But I didn't really know anything about Protestantism. The one thing I knew, being Catholic, was that their beliefs on communion were not the same, and that they didn't have a lot of the things like confession and a pope and all that. So I thought I sort of looked at all Catholics as all Protestants as Catholic light, like, and not in a bad way. That's just the bucket I sort of filed it into my brain. And
Sure.
My wife and I started dating, and she's like, yeah, I'm a Christian. It's pretty important to me. And I'm like, Christian, okay. Like I had never heard it referred to as being a Christian. Yeah, like I grew up in New England, and it has a reputation as a pretty unchurched area, and rightly so in a lot of ways, either unchurched or Catholic. So I'm like, who calls themselves a Christian? Like, you're either a Methodist or a Baptist or a Catholic or whatever. And she's like, no. And, and she sort of explained, the basics of how, getting saved and all that. And I was like, oh, okay. And, I didn't really know what to make of it. I mean, it certainly sounded better than what I had heard growing up, which was sort of this confused jumble of, yes, you do need to believe in Jesus, and, no one really said growing up that the Catholic Church was the one true church, because they had sort of softened on that. Like, I'm sure a lot of people still believe that, but that's not the line I got in church or Sunday school or anything like that. But it was like, yeah, you should believe in Jesus, and but you need to do good things too. Like, you could go to hell for a myriad of things if they were mortal sins, which meant that the punishment was hell, and that you did not then go to confession to clear the mortal sin from your soul, which, of course, you tell a kid that, and the first, someone raises their hand immediately, well, what if you rob a bank and then you get into a car accident after, and you really wanted to go, and you couldn't make it to confession, and no one really has an answer for that. And there were venial... What?
Oh, I'm sorry. Reading a little bit on your site about that, that was very... sort of enlightening, just in the way you sort of describe Catholic guilt, because there's also Protestant guilt. And
oh yeah. I didn't find out that until it was too late. But yeah.
But I found that very very enlightening. I grew up in Indiana before my family moved when I was in high school to the Chicago suburbs, and then suddenly I'm surrounded by a lot of people that happen to be Catholic, which just wasn't part of where my early youth was. So for that to kind of read what you were writing about, as far as all those concerns about going to hell, and in relation to these trivialities, kind of, to kind of cast a pall on it a little bit.
right.
But yeah, just like you're saying, and I think you had something similar on your site about all these sorts of this algebra you're trying to do in your head, relative to sin and forgiveness. So
it's just no one had a clear answer. Like, well, I want to go to heaven. What do I do? And they're like, well, you be a good person, and you just kind of hope you get in. And I'm someone who suffers from anxiety, and that gave me a lot of anxiety, even when I was in high school. Like, I'm like, I don't want to go to hell. And this is sort of a recurring theme in my life, or at least in my spiritual life. Like, I can't just accept the fact, well, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and sort of let the rest of the stuff go. Like, I mean, my parents they're still Catholic, and they go to church every Sunday, and on what's called, the holy days of obligation, like Feast of the Assumption and all that stuff. Like, you have to go to church. It's a mortal sin not to go to church. Mm-hmm. They do that. They don't eat meat on Fridays during Lent. My mom actually still does not eat meat on Christmas Eve, because that used to be a rule. The church changed it, but she still follows that one. And, I mean, they give what they can give. And then beyond that, I mean, my parents are good people, but they don't spend a lot of time worrying about all the other rules. Mm-hmm. Whereas with me, I needed to make sure, like, okay, if you're going to tell me there's this place called heaven and this place called hell, I want to make sure I'm getting into heaven. Let's do this, And it just finally got to be too much. Well, and I think getting some distance from it in college really helped. But so anyway, when my wife explained the whole salvation thing from a Protestant point of view, I mean, I still wasn't even sure if I believed in God, but I'm like, oh wow, that seems way easier. Like, I just need to believe in Jesus, and I mean, we had like the textbook believer unbeliever conversation. It's like, so you're saying that I could believe in Jesus and kill as many people as I want, but blah 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 blah. She's like, and she gave the textbook answer. Well, yeah, but if you were a Christian, you wouldn't want to do that stuff because Jesus changes you. And I'm like, oh, okay. And she was at a point in her faith where she had all but walked away from it. Not entirely, but she had lived out in Oregon for a while, and she had experimented with Wicca and stuff like that. Like, never really seriously, but she had known some friends who were into it, and so she was sort of at a point in her life where she didn't really care about it that much. But I think dating a non-Christian guy sort of made her care about it more. And I wish I could walk you through the process that got me to where I, said my version of the sinner's prayer. I can't. I mean, that's one of the things that prevents me from being a complete atheist today. I'm like, I know something weird happened at that point in my life, because I cannot stress this enough. I did not, or at least I did not believe that I was becoming a Christian for my wife. I'm not that kind of person. And I told her flat out when we were dating, I'm like, you need to accept that this might never happen, because I don't know if I'm like, this doesn't make sense to me. I mean, other than the whole salvation thing sounding kind of nice. I mean, I'm like, why would I choose Christianity over any other religion? But I did get to that point. Like, I don't really have an explanation for it. I started going to church with her once in a while. We sort of church shopped a little bit when we were dating, and it was interesting. But I sort of like felt the attraction to that belief system, or to Jesus, whatever you want to call it. Until, finally one day I was at home. I was in the shower, of all places. And, I said, God, I want this. I want to be saved, And I was thinking, I'm like, wait, am I a Christian now? And I'm like, no, I can't be. No, wait, no, I think I am. So, I called my wife and told her, and she was ecstatic, of course. And, so I started wanting to go to church. Like, it didn't have to be any particular church. I'm like, oh, I should try this. And she was like, oh, that's great. I'm going to sleep in, but you have fun. So we were living in Massachusetts at the time, and I tried all the local flavors, and we wound up at this United Church of Christ church, one town over there. They're pretty liberal, but they had a female pastor, which my wife liked. My wife is a diehard feminist. And I think I've seen this a few times where women get ordained, and they're fairly conservative theologically, but they can't get a job at a conservative church because conservative churches don't hire women as pastors. So they wind up pastoring the denomination that's more liberal than they were. So I think that sort of made it a good combination for my wife, because it wasn't too I don't know. I guess the term they use is watered down. Like it sounded like what she was used to hearing, but from a woman, And we went there until I got laid off from my job. I'm a software developer, and I graduated just as the .com bubble was bursting. Not a good time. So I got laid off. We moved to Iowa, which is where her family was living, and her parents rented us a house for next to nothing, just the cost of the mortgage, and which in Iowa is really next to nothing. And we lived there for 2 years. We didn't have a church that we went to regularly the entire time, because my wife will not go to any church where her father is a pastor. So her father is like, he is the most typical like fire and brimstone conservative Republican Baptist pastor you can just about possibly imagine. His denomination is actually called General Regular Baptists, which sounds like a really fun bunch.
I haven't heard of that one. I know
it's small.
There's I know like Southern Baptist, Free Will Baptist, That's a new one for me.
Yeah.
I know there's lots of flavors.
I never heard of Free Will Baptist until you just mentioned it.
Yeah.
No, they're a very small group. And so I never really. I have heard him preach because a few times early on we were dating, she would still go occasionally. She'd usually be pissed by the time he was done, but she would still go. But she was a pastor's kid, and she got to see behind the curtain, not just what happened on Sunday morning. Like she would see her mom trying to get her and her 4 siblings ready for church, and the whole family's squabbling and yelling, and then her dad has to go on and be like, put on the smiley face and pretend everything's okay. Which I mean, that's just part of the job, and you're a pastor. I think I don't even blame him for that. But
I'm married to a PK too, so.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
so, they're.
I mean, it's a very unique way to grow up.
Yeah. But, by the time we got married, I mean, I won't say her father had mellowed. He's still hardcore conservative Republican turn or burn type, but he had kind of mellowed from what she described growing up. From what my wife has described, she grew up in an abusive home. It wasn't like her parents beat her constantly or anything like that, but it was a lot of verbal abuse from her dad, some physical abuse, especially when she was older. It was really rough. But she has a younger brother that's 2 years older than her, and then there's a group of 3 siblings who are all within a year or two of each other, and they're about 10 to 12 years younger than her. So it's almost like there were 2 families, kind of. Or not 2 families. Sorry, that's a bad way of saying it. But 2 different experiences of the parents. Like her and her immediate brother got the really strict, really, really bad version, whereas the kids got kind of a little watered down. Not much, but they had mellowed on some stuff. But anyway, so her dad is just. I had never met anybody like him before. He always seemed happy, except when he was angry, which should have been a warning sign. But again, I was just kind of young and naive. I'm like, oh, this seems like a really nice guy. I believed everything she told me about him from when they were growing up. I'm like, well, maybe he's changed or something like that. Like they say, she says Jesus changes people, so maybe that's what's happening. I don't even know that I thought it through that far, but he seemed really nice, and he liked me. He's like, I wish you were a Christian if you're going to date my daughter, but I'd like you. He didn't treat me badly because of it. He talked to me about it, and I told him how I felt. I'm like, yeah, I'm an agnostic. And he walked me through the Romans Road and all this stuff. And, but anyway, so we lived in Iowa for a couple of years. Eventually moved back here, as I got another job, in my industry. And then that's when we started attending an evangelical church regularly. 1 town over from us. And, we got involved. We attended a small group. We became really close friends with the small group, the couple that ran the small group. They live in the same town as we do. And everything was going pretty well. My wife liked our church. She had a problem with their views on women, but not enough to make her stop going. And I think the thing that really clinched is that we really liked our small group. And from what I can piece together from some stuff that happened later on, I think our group sort of insulated us from a lot of the bad stuff at our church. It was just different. The couple that ran it, they obviously they attended that church. They had a lot of the same beliefs, but I don't think they were quite as into it as some of the leadership was. But it all started, probably 5 or 6 years ago now. Jeez. Where so I had become assistant small group leader, and so I was at all the meetings and stuff. So they called a meeting, and they said that our worship pastor had been having an affair with one of the women in the worship group. I'm like, wow. It was like a death in the family, almost. Sorry, what?
One quick question. How large was the church? Was it a smaller church or was it a...
It wasn't tiny. It wasn't I would say at its height, maybe like 500 or 600.
Oh, okay. So
But
pretty
not,
sizable.
but not all of them attending.
Mhm.
I mean, they had 3 services on Sunday. So yeah, it wasn't a mega, but it wasn't a tiny one either.
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
So yeah, no problem.
So you were part of this leadership meeting where they said the worship pastor was having an affair.
Yes. So I mean, it didn't come as a total shock. I mean, we knew that they were close as friends, but we never thought it was anything more than that. So he lost his job, and I mean, he was living in church housing, so they let him, I think, finish out the year in that before he had to look for someplace else to live. And I think at the time, I mean, it seemed like they handled it pretty well. They interviewed everyone he had worked with, so it came out that he had an affair with another woman on the worship team a few years ago. But the 2 of them and their respective spouses got together, had a meeting, decided that the church didn't need to know, that they were just it was between them and God, and it was over, and that was that. So there were 2 affairs now that we had heard of, and so they formed they formed a committee to do the investigation. It was made up of people within the church, but I mean, it seemed like they were taking it really seriously. Like, they let the congregation know, like, once they didn't. As soon as anything was verified, they let the conversation know, after letting the leadership know a little bit before that. I mean, it seemed like they were serious about it and wanting to change and all that. So, we moved past it. I mean, we didn't leave the church because we figured, hey, nobody's perfect. And it seems like they've dealt with the situation. So we stayed. Then the next thing was that it came out that my father-in-law had molested one of my brothers-in-law when he was I think he was still a teenager when we found out. Jeez, but when he was a little younger, so that was another huge mess. And
do these things overlap? Like you're having these. Or in rapid succession?
Pretty rapid succession. Like oh God, it's all such a blur now. But I'm pretty sure that the affair and the uncovering of the molestation happened at least within a year of each other.
Wow.
I mean, we had sort of moved past the affair, but then it was like this came like wham, and I was just angry. And of course, we have this. His father, my father-in-law, doesn't see why he needs to tell his church about this at all. Oh, well, it happened before I was a pastor there. It's fine. Like, are you kidding me? So, my wife was really upset about it. She wrote him a letter. She talked to him about it. Just couldn't make him see reason. So finally, they're coming out for a visit. They're like, well, we'll talk. My wife was seeing a therapist, a Christian therapist, and they agreed to talk to the therapist with us. And, while we're waiting for that to happen, I'm just getting angrier and angrier at God. Like, how can someone who says they're a loving God let this happen? I mean, really, it's weird because I was very comfortable with God letting bad things happen when they weren't happening to me. I mean, not that I thought of it that way, but it's just different when they're not happening to you. Like, it's a lot easier to say, like, God works in mysterious ways when it's just someone you don't know. But this was the first real, this is the first real trauma I had ever been through. And it wasn't even happening directly to me. I mean, I wasn't the one who was molested. Not even my wife was the one, but it was her brother. It was her little brother. And it was by her father. So I just got to the point where, all my questions from college just came flooding back. Like, I think it always kind of been there, but it was like one section of my personality sort of reasserted itself after. Like, I'd been a Christian for 10 years when all this happened. And not to say the doubts ever fully went away. I mean, like I said, I'm not super comfortable with certainty. I mean, people would say, like, oh, God answered this prayer, and I'll be like, oh, well, that's great. And thinking to myself, like, well, you don't know that's what happened. Like, maybe that would have happened even if you hadn't prayed. Then I would just feel guilty for thinking that, that Protestant guilt that you referred to earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, I was never big on like witnessing to people, and that's partly because I'm an introvert, but partly because I'm like, am I really going to go to heaven when I die? Like, I think about it and I feel like, it's like, is my soul really going to separate from my body and go somewhere when I die? Do I really believe that? And I did at the time, but the doubt was still there, So anyway, they come out for this meeting, and my faith is pretty shaken up. And, my wife said, well, why don't you go talk to our pastor? I'm like, all right. And I mean, he's a nice guy, but I mean, basically he's saying like, oh yeah, well, this happens to everybody. You'll get through it. I mean, not quite that flip, but I mean, that was the gist of it. And I mean, really, what can you say in that situation? Like there is no answer to the question of why God allows bad things to happen. There just isn't. I mean, people have been wrestling for that since people started believing in God. But anyway, whatever he said, it did not help. Then we went to the meeting, and my father-in-law was just unbelievable. Like comparing himself to King David, who was tempted beyond measure, and he just, like blaming his son for what had happened because, well, he's the one who got into bed with me. Like, are you kidding me? Like I was up in his face screaming like someone. So the counselor's office we were in had multiple counselors, and someone had to come in and say, other people can hear you. Could you please? So like I had to like take a break where I like went and punched a wall and cursed a lot, and then managed to go back in and finish the meeting. And our pastor, the same one I had talked to, was in the meeting. Didn't really say a whole lot, and then at the end was kind of like because my in-laws refused to go to any sort of counseling other than this thing called Heretic counseling, which is biblically based counseling, and it's just I mean, I've never been to one, obviously, but I mean, he went to this counselor a few times. His counselor couldn't even give him a clear answer. Like, do you need to tell your church? He's like, oh, I don't know. I'll have to think about that one. Like, well, if you have to think about that, like, then I don't trust you as a counselor. I'm sorry. You need to find another job. So, I mean, I was just like screaming in his face. He's like, well, the Bible says. I'm like, I don't give a.
You can swear. It's fine.
That's the one thing I forgot to ask.
No, yeah, you can swear. It's fine.
I said, I don't give a fuck what the Bible says. He's like, he looks at me. He's like, no, well, I think you've made that very clear. Like, I do lose my temper on occasion, but it's rare. And I was just this was the angriest I've ever been in my life. So we sort of ended the meeting on, well, we'll think about whether or not we're going to do anything, which was my pastor's way of just getting out of dealing with the conflict. Like, again, he's a very nice guy, but this was one of the problems that became evident when they started doing this investigation and people started talking about, like, he just does not handle conflict well. And he's the head pastor, like, which I get it. I hate conflict, but you can't have that kind of job if you're not going to deal with conflict, like I'm a software engineer. I don't have to deal with conflict if I don't want to. It's just not an issue, but like, dude, you're a pastor. Like Anyway, so the meeting was a complete disaster, but ended at least on civil terms. Like I had calmed down and we sort of made up, and I thought maybe they would actually think about it and do something. No, they never did. We finished out the visit. They never mentioned it again. They have done nothing. So they're dead to me as far as I'm concerned, except of course for the fact that they're my in-laws. So I still have to play nice with them, which is not easy for me because I hate it because I feel like I'm being a phony. But the way I think of it is I'm doing it for my wife and to a lesser extent for my kids who are not allowed to be alone with him ever. We have three daughters. The oldest is 8 years old. So, I mean, I play nice when they visit and that's about it. So after that, the next thing that happened, and again, this is where it gets unclear. Oh no! Wait, no. Sorry, I do know. We had stopped going to church there, and then it came out that the youth pastor got a divorce. Which, I mean, of all things, like a divorce, like, okay, divorces happen, whatever. But the way they handled it was not good. There's actually a post about this on my blog where I published the letter that they sent out to the congregation, changing the names, obviously. The tone of the letter. They basically threw the wife under the bus. I mean, they didn't quite come out and say that, but that's what happened. And oddly enough, I never meant for anyone at church to find my blog, but some people did. And both the youth pastor and his wife read that post and kind of agreed with it. Because I mean, at that point, like they sent out the letter, like the youth pastor didn't have anything to say about it. I mean, he was in hot water because of all this. I think I can't remember if he's still there or not. So I don't want to comment on that. I want to say he is, but I'm not sure. But anyway, compared to the affair, I mean, that wasn't as bad. It was just the way it was handled that really ticked me off. And then on top of that, then the administrative pastor, who was second in command, sort of, I still to this day don't know exactly what happened. Only there was some type of impropriety between him and his assistant. Not sexual, they were told, but the assistant was let go. Okay, so I don't know if it was some kind of emotional affair or what. But another thing that came out of the investigation is that this guy, the administrative pastor, was pretty toxic in the way that he dealt with people and just was manipulative and shaming and all around not good. That led to the church bringing in an outside, I guess there's these sort of like consulting agencies that consult with churches and about like what they could do better. And again, at this point, I'm not attending our small group leaders, and there is no small group anymore. It's broken up. They're not attending. So, I mean, anything I hear on this is like second or third hand. But they got this investigation done and said that they were, we're willing to resign, if that's what they admit. And no one has resigned. I don't know if anything's changed. I have no idea. I know that they've gone down to 2 services from 3. That's about it. But as far as I know, all the same pastors are still there.
So they brought in an Accenture for churches to do some sort of consulting.
I think that's what it was called. Yeah. And I mean, they knew enough to bring it in, but I from what I understand, it's not like this committee went through and like, yeah, guys, doing a great job. That was not it. But I don't know how much, if anything, has changed because I'm just not a part of that community anymore. I would suspect nothing has changed, but I'm cynical in case that wasn't evident from my blog.
And is that a non-denominational church or an independent church?
It has evangelical in the name, and they're part of a Baptist group, but other than like they get like material from them, it doesn't mean a whole lot. There's no real oversight. But they didn't stress the independent thing too much.
Gotcha.
So then that led to me forming the blog because I'm a writer in my spare time. And I just decided one day to do it. I kind of always wanted a blog or something like that. I wrote up a few posts one day and showed it to the wife of our former small group leader. She's like, "That's really good. I think you should publish that." So, I published the first few posts into the My Story tag, and I got pretty involved in Twitter and all that. I don't know how much you're on Twitter.
I'm on it too much, but
yeah, that was me at one point. It's like drinking from a fire hose, as you know, and I just got into this. It was like scandal of the week over like which evangelical dude said this or did that, and I'd write a post about it sometimes, and it was fun. I mean, it was cathartic for me. It just reached a point where the fire sort of burned out for me, and I feel like I've told my story, most of it. I don't feel the need to like comment on everything Mark Driscoll says anymore. Although I don't judge people who do. I think there's definitely a place for that, and I think it's good. Part of it is also that I think just the online mindset has changed a lot. Like a lot of the people I follow who talked about religion, they don't really talk about that anymore because everybody's talking about Black Lives Matter and Donald Trump and all that stuff, which is totally fine. Those are important topics, but it just the sort of, I don't know, the landscape, if you will, of Twitter sort of changed. And I also feel like people aren't on Twitter as much anymore, but maybe that's because I'm bitter because I don't get retweeted as much as I used to. So I haven't really blogged anymore. I've thought about picking it up, but honestly, what I want to do is write fiction. And I have 3 kids, a full-time job. I barely have time to do that. So to find time to write blog posts on top of that when I'm not even when I don't even feel a huge need to do it. I just don't have time right now, but I may get back to it at some point. I don't know. But so right now we attend an Episcopalian church, which is funny because this is a church in the same town as our old church, and it made the news because, it made the local news because when there was the split in the evangelical church over or the ordainment of gay bishops or priests or whatever. Our current church is the one who was on the side of ordaining them, and the other people actually formed a church in exile within our old church. They used to meet in the basement. We let them meet in there. So we're now attending the church that people at our church judge for being too liberal. So that's pretty funny. The thing is, it's like, for me, it reminds me so much of the Catholic services that I'm just like, I just can't. I just can't. Like, I go because it's important to my wife, and the people are nice. There's nothing offensive in any of the sermons. It's just like, I don't know if the part of my brain that processes ritual and imagery either doesn't work correctly or has been burned out after 18 years of Catholicism. I'm just like, this is just why are we doing? And again, if people who find meaning out of that with my wife, that's great. I don't judge. I don't think I'm better than them. It just doesn't work for me. So
yeah,
my wife started doing the coffee hour. She took over handling that, and it's a very small church now. There's probably, like, the service we go to, about 25 people tops. So she wound up doing coffee hour a lot of weeks by herself because nobody signed up, and I started helping her with it. And I realized, I'm like, oh, if I'm doing coffee hour, I don't have to go to church, because I was in the kitchen doing stuff, and so we sort of fell into this pattern where it's just sort of understood, like, I'd handle coffee hour, and she'd go to church, and I'd show up for communion in the last 5 or 10 minutes. I'm like, oh, this is good. And then, so finally I said to her one day, I'm like, what if I just, because she said, I can't do coffee hour anymore. This is too much. I'm like, oh no. And I said to her, well, what if I just did it? And she's like, you want to do that? I'm like, I was honest with her. I'm like, yeah, I don't have to go to church, but I'm still there. So it's like, it's not like, I mean, it's not exactly like she's by herself. I mean, she sort of is, but I'm there participating in something. She's like, okay, yeah, we can give that a shot. So now I'm like the unofficial coffee hour person at our church, which I just find very funny. But it works for us right now, so we'll keep going with that. And as far as what I believe, I mean, I it's funny because I find myself in the same position. I can't say I'm an atheist. I mean, I sympathize with atheists. I don't blame them for their beliefs, and on some days I agree with them, but I just have this theist part of my brain that can't let go. I mean, like, I can see how people say, like, well, obviously people just invented God because we're just apes who evolved and could tell we were going to die, and it scared us, so we invented God in this place called heaven. I think, yeah, that makes sense. But then, you look at the complexity found in the universe. I'm like, come on, this is really all an accident. Come on, there's just no way. So I don't really, I mean, I'm not really a Christian anymore. I don't belong to any particular faith or creed. I mean, I don't consider myself an Episcopalian, even though we are actually officially members of the church. But
yeah,
I mean, I don't know what I believe, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I used to fear doubt, and now, like, doubt is like all I have. But I feel like when you're certain about stuff, or not, like I said, I'm never super comfortable with certainty. But when I was as certain as I was, it felt good. I mean, we like to know what's going on, feel like we maybe not have control over it, but like, oh yeah, I know what's happening. I'm on the right side of this. But anything that challenges that is very scary. Whereas, I mean, when you doubt, I mean, anything, you can't really get too shooken up. I mean, it's like buildings that they designed to resist earthquakes. You're like, yeah, you'll sort of shake and wobble, but at the end of the day, you're like, yeah, well, maybe I'm wrong, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's a very comforting feeling to me, at least. And I mean, beyond that, I mean, it just.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot there. I mean, I think kind of in the way you had like a series of traumatic things happen to you, and there are also people that represent the faith you were a part of. And when that happens, it's really very easy to feel angry, and it's justified to feel angry. And then like after that, I think one of the things that should be kind of understood and accepted is that a lot of times that requires distancing yourself. When you were talking about your experience at this evangelical church, it really resonated with me. We have, my wife and I, we have we have one daughter. She's 4 now. But we were going to a basically independent church, and we loved it because of our small group, just like you.
Yeah.
Like I grew up United Methodist, which always ordained women. My wife grew up PK in a more conservative denomination, but was still within that tradition, so to speak. But women pastors weren't really the norm. We, by virtue of just friend circles and a couple other things, we get really involved in this church. They have a very that kind of BS term, complementarianism. That
I don't know if you read my post about that, but I do have one.
I haven't read that one yet, but yeah, that's a bad word and a bad system. But anyways, we're part of this complementarian church, and as our daughter gets a little older, we actually talk to our pastor, and anyways, they try to, we tell them that we're egalitarian, et cetera. They're like, yeah, you can leave, basically. Sorry, we're not going to change our position. We were on the worship team, et cetera. We were involved. We were very involved.
Yeah.
And it was a small church, like probably less than 100 people attended regularly in like a school gym. But anyways, all these things happen, and eventually we're kind of coerced to leave.
Right.
Even though, and it's all about, it was definitely all about control, about maintaining the norm, about all these things. And we were burned. Like, I mean, there was a small church, and we knew most of the people pretty well. And then all of a sudden that support system gone, because the person, the initial lead pastor left, because of like a family member was ill, and they kind of went to make sure that family member was okay. Another person kind of rose up and became the pastor through not the best of means. And that person was our friend, and he was essentially the one that coerced us to leave. We were angry we didn't go to church basically for like 2 years, and we still haven't found a place to like go regularly. But oddly enough, there's some good like Episcopal churches in the Chicago area where we live. So that's kind of where we're leaning towards right now.
Yeah.
But I mean, for a church that was founded because Henry VIII needed a divorce, they're doing all.
Yeah.
They, I mean, really, that's your religious heritage when you're Anglican. But whatever.
Yeah.
Anyways, where was I? Anyways, yeah, we were upset and kind of didn't force trying to get right into a church. So I think kind of where you are now makes sense for what you experienced all those years ago. And I think that being comfortable with that is, and also moving to not necessarily a place of, you're not, someone would negatively might describe it as complacency, but it's just not like the angry fire isn't burning anymore, and that's probably a good thing, to be in that spot. So, yeah, where you are now, like that's where you're comfortable, but I mean, yeah, also that very same idea of not being able to go full blown atheist or whatever.
Yeah.
That makes sense with it just yeah, some people just have a leaning, and it's just always kind of be a leaning. And for me, I have like a low grade version of epilepsy, so I don't know what my brain chemistry is like telling me. Like Dostoevsky was an epileptic too, and he wrote wonderful literature that involved Christian themes. And was it because his brain chemistry was weird? I don't know.
Yeah,
but
yeah, that was actually a thing I didn't touch on, but I got on medication for anxiety. Let me think. Was that after everything happened? No, it wasn't, because I was seeing a Christian counselor who advised me to get on medication. So no, that was before things started happening. And all that, people always said, "Oh, Jesus will give you peace," and it kind of did. I mean, I used religion to manage my anxiety for a while, but then I was on the medication. I was like, "Oh wow, this is awesome!" like this is what people must have been talking about. And, so I'm on medication for that and for mild depression as well. So I'm not going to say that, that wasn't really instrumental in me losing my faith, I don't think, because of all the other stuff was happening. But it also, it added to it, Yeah, no, I know what you mean about like not knowing where the line between me and my brain chemistry is sometimes. Yeah,
and
it's weird.
Yeah, and that's another thing where you just kind of have to be comfortable with the not knowing.
Yeah.
So right now you do kind of do. I mean, there's a lot I'd love to sort of unpack about all the things you mentioned. But let's start kind of again right near where you left off. You
Sure.
You feel comfortable describing yourself as an agnostic.
Yeah.
And that's you've kind of been in that space for a while. How does that affect your marriage, and also sort of what you're trying to teach your children? Because to me that's an open question too.
Yeah.
I don't like I mentioned, I grew up United Methodist. I'm fairly comfortable with that tradition. I think they toe the line. They're pretty mainline. They're pretty open. I'd be happy with that. But I mean, another part of me doesn't. I'm not like I'm not over the moon in extending that tradition through my child. So
no, I hear you.
So I mean, growing up Catholic and then now going. You've had both the Starbucks and the Dunkin' Donuts of the church.
Can I do I have permission to use that line?
Yes,
I like that one.
You've had the two major flavors. You've had So you've had evangelical, at least in the United States. You've had Catholic and evangelical. So
well, it's definitely it's been hard on our marriage. I mean, my wife's great, and she did not try to push me. I mean, let me put it this way: she probably wanted to push way more than she actually did, which was almost not. I mean, she made it clear how she felt and that this was hard for her, but she just didn't have. I mean, obviously we went through all this stuff together, but she did not fall, if you will, as far as I did. I mean, she's left evangelicalism too, but I mean, I think honestly, she'd probably be open to possibly be open to going back to an evangelical church at some point. Maybe not as a full-time member, but I mean, there's me. I'm done. There's nothing for me there. I mean, I'm not saying. I mean, our closest friends that we live next door to us now, they go to an evangelical church. I mean, I'm friends with them. I have no problem with that, but I'm not. I'm done with that religion. I mean, me being comfortable not knowing, I think, is hard for her. She'd like she said, I'd like to feel like you're moving towards something. I'm like, I don't feel like I'm moving towards something, because I feel like I'm here. I'm where I need to be, and I don't feel, other than the fact that it's hurting her, I don't feel a need to move past it, and I can't just move myself past it because of her. Unfortunately, I can't. You can't make yourself do that. It doesn't work. But the thing I always tell her, I'm like, I don't think our beliefs are as different as you think they are. Because she still believes in Jesus, obviously, and I'm not even saying I don't. I have a huge amount of doubt in regards to him, but I'm not completely writing him off. But she doesn't witness to people. She doesn't really believe in the inerrancy of Scripture. She likes the Bible, but she doesn't look at it the way she used to. Obviously she goes to a very liberal church. And a lot, I think the main thing is it was something we had in common and now it's not. And that really hurts for her. Whereas it doesn't feel that way for me. I don't know if it's because I'm a guy or what, but I can look at it and be like, oh yeah, that's unfortunate, but it just doesn't affect me the same way it affects her. So as far as my kids, we when this started happening, we had this was not easy because I was very much against teaching our kids any kind of religion, didn't want anything to do with it, but I reached a point where I'm kind of okay with it. Like my oldest daughter went through a phase that every kid goes through, around 4 or 5. She's coming to terms with death. Like she still never experienced a death in the family, but like she's coming to terms with the fact that yes, this is something that happens to everybody. Yes, it's going to happen to mom and dad. Oh, it's not going to happen for a long, long time. Hopefully, not that we don't really stress that part, but and seeing her go through that, and I can already tell has some of my anxiety issues. And we're working with her to try to give her tools to deal with them. But seeing her go through that, I'm like, yeah, I'm okay saying like, yeah, when you die, we just all go to heaven. It's a big party. Like, I don't feel like that's a lie because I don't know what happens after we die. That's kind of a cop out, but that's kind of how I view it. Like, if it helps her now deal with that, get to an age where that's not enough, clearly, and she's going to want to know more. But a lot of my beliefs at this point are so abstract, you can't explain them to an 8. Even now, when she's 8, I can't explain most of them to her. Like, so they go to Sunday school, which for the most part I'm okay with, although there was, I don't really know how this happened, but there was sort of a splinter group of Sunday school for some of the older kids. So they were watching this video series so my oldest daughter was watching it, and I was overhearing it from the kitchen where I'm doing coffee hour. I'm like, it's talking about Adam and Eve and the fall of humanity. I'm like, oh God, not this. Obviously it's still not nearly as bad as what you would get in an evangelical church, but and then so the deacon, she's very nice, but she was there watching it and then somehow launches into the story of Job. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, obviously it's sort of a dumbed down version for kids, but I'm like, yeah, come here. I need you to help me out in the kitchen. So that's how I dealt with that. And I told my wife I was not happy about that. So I don't think they're doing that anymore. So I think it's just regular Sunday school for the time being. So, as they get older, I'll talk to them more about stuff like that as they're able to handle it. So we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants there, really.
Yeah,
occasionally. Yeah, I think
that's
that's
most
the
of
best thing
parenting.
to do. Absolutely. She asked me what an atheist was. I'm like, it's someone who doesn't believe in God. She's like, well, that's stupid. I'm like, well, why is that stupid? Like I didn't not to put her on the spot. I just kind of wanted her to think about it. Like, well, you don't have to believe in God. It's okay. And she said, the time she said, Dad, does God control the weather? And I said, well, I don't know. But if God does control the weather, he's not doing a very good job. And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, for the most part, we live in New England. Our weather's pretty good here, right? She said, yeah. And I said, well, there's parts of the world that get droughts and floods and earthquakes. Like, oh, yeah. And, I just left it at that because I'm not trying to attack her 8-year-old faith or anything. I'm just sort of trying to help her think through some of this stuff. And if she thinks through it and decides she still wants to be a Christian, that's great. And if she thinks through it and decides she wants to lean more toward my view, that's obviously better. But no, I'm kidding. But I don't know. I can't figure it out for them. I can help them, but that's all I can do. So, yeah, they've been baptized in the Episcopal Church. Other than that, they don't really do First Communion or anything. I think they do confirmation. So, yeah, they do. My wife actually got confirmed. So we'll see how they feel about that when it's time for that. I mean, that's, like you said, that's all you can do.
Mm-hmm. So just moving back a little bit to jumping back to kind of your college time. I know I'm just want to unpack that a little bit too.
Sure.
So did you go to like a public school or a state school?
No.
Oh, you didn't.
I guess it wasn't a state school, so I guess that makes it a private school.
Yeah.
I went to WPI in Massachusetts.
Okay, but it didn't have any sort of religious affiliation at the time.
No.
Okay, no. Gotcha. So was part of sort of your exploration of your faith at that time and everything, was it spurred on by any sorts of classes you took that first year, or was it just the kind of unpacking and the freedom of being a college freshman and everything?
It was just the freedom, because WPI they're kind of weird. They don't have core classes. You take classes for your major, obviously, and then everyone is supposed to take a certain number of humanities classes, but they could be anything. So I took history, and none of the history I took really touched on religion at all. So I didn't have the intro to philosophy class, the boogeyman that evangelicals talk about sometimes, saying God is dead or anything like that. No, it was really just, well, A, I stopped going to church. Mm-hmm. And B, it was just having friends who, most of my friends didn't really have a religious upbringing, so they had sort of already arrived where I was. So the thing is, when you hang around people who think a certain way long enough, you don't have to start thinking that way, but it does influence you. That's something I had to learn. I think that was part of why I became an evangelical. I still can't fully explain it, so I'm willing to admit that there may be something more to it, if you want to call it supernatural or whatever. But you hang around people long enough, they start to influence you. I thought being gay was great. Who cares? And then I started hanging around all these conservative Christians who didn't think it was so great. And all of a sudden I thought, yeah, I agree with that. And I honestly felt that I'm like, this is God changing me. It didn't feel like I was copying people to fit in. I don't think I was doing that. I'm not a person who tends to do that. But then when I stopped being a Christian, all of a sudden being gay is great again. So I don't know. In a lot of ways, like, losing my faith felt a lot like gaining it. I can't fully explain either thing. Like, pretty sure I've written before, either on my blog or on a guest post, it feels like my faith just disappeared. Like, that's not exactly what happened. It wasn't like, I was fine 1 minute and then boom, gone the next. But it after it happened, it felt like if you've been living in a house and you woke up and just the house is gone and you're just in the middle of a field and you're like, what just happened? Because I don't, any attempt to try to make myself believe what I used to believe, it's just like that part of me is not there anymore, which is a very disconcerting feeling. There's enough of me there to say I'm still a theist most days, but as far as all the other stuff, I can't tell you why I used to believe the Bible was the inerrant word of God. That was another person, or might as well be another any more than when I believed it. I couldn't tell you why I used to not believe it, other than the fact that the Holy Spirit hadn't yet awoken me to it, or however you want to say it. Mm-hmm. It's just I was this thing, now I'm this thing, and now I'm another thing. It's very baffling.
Yeah, and in order, the very sort of idea of in order to gain your life, you must lose it.
Kind of, yeah.
And I think there's validity to that. I don't know if have you ever listened to another podcast called "You Made It Weird" with Pete Holmes?
Yes, I have. I love Pete Holmes.
Yeah, so he talks about that a lot on his shows, and he grew up evangelical. He grew up similar to how I did, but in the East Coast near Boston. And he has even talked to that fact. like for him it was his own divorce that like really made him break down. Like he began to deconstruct his faith, and then he was after that able to reconstruct it into a new thing. And that new thing is less, it's more malleable, but it's still something. You know, there's still something at work there. Which I just recently, in this period where we weren't really attending a church, and right now we're more in the phase of like trying to find a place to go. That's kind of where we are. But when we weren't going, I think it was either maybe like Homebrew Christianity or another sort of podcast. There was an author that wrote a book called What Christianity Is Not. And the whole thing is about just describing Christianity by saying what it isn't, which to me is actually apparently it's part of a tradition of theology called apophatic theology, which means describing things through negative theology, and through saying what God is not. God is love; He is not hate. Things like that.
Right. Huh, and that rings a bell. Right.
So to me, that's kind of where I feel people that sort of exit evangelicalism. It can be a healthy starting place to kind of begin to rebuild things, because you have such a strong example of the things you no longer identify with.
Right.
And then the thing outside of it, one thing that I'm hoping to write on and talk about is like within evangelicalism in particular, your life is either entirely about God or it's not about God at all. There's no middle ground. And to me, that's just, it's false. There's gotta be something there. There's gotta be more than just a gaping chasm between those things. Because even if you yourself being a writer and writing about faith, I don't know if you've ever felt the fear of being pigeonholed as being the guy that only writes about religion. But that, like, to me is I know you're doing it anonymously, but even so, to me, being a writer as well, that's been an anxiety-inducing idea in my head for 10 years.
I've definitely thought about, like, okay, if I ever get to the point with this writing thing where I publish, like, what do I do? Like, do I just start a new Twitter handle, or do I just...
Yeah, exactly.
What
do you do with your Twitter handle?
Well, there's a guy who writes for cracked.com, and he goes by the handle David Wong. So, you're reading this guy, articles by this guy, and you think, oh, well, okay, this guy's Asian, right? David Wong. That's a legitimate conclusion. And then you hear him on the podcast. No. And he tells the story. His name is, I don't know. Oh, Jason something. So, yeah, when I got on the internet, kind of as a joke, he's like, I wanted to pick the most common name. He wanted anonymity. So he said he looked it up, and Wong was the most common last name, and David was the most common first time. So he's like, great, I'll be David Wong. Well, now he's stuck with this name. I have thought about that. I mean, I haven't really gotten to the point where I've published anything yet, so it's not really an issue. But that I've definitely had some of those same concerns. And podcasts also, so awesome. That's one of the ways my wife has sort of managed to sort of find that commonality again, because we listen to some of the same podcasts. Like for a while we read the same blogs, like Rachel Held Evans was one, Elizabeth Esther was another. But what happens with a lot of the popular bloggers, they become authors and they don't blog as much, which is legitimate. So we started listening to podcasts, and we listened to one called The Liturgists, with this guy, really interesting guy. His name is Mike Mahargan, I think, but he goes by Science Mike. Pete Holmes interviewed him, so you can find an episode of. I didn't. Yeah, just really smart guy, really interesting. He loves science, obviously, and he grew up Southern Baptist. Went through a crisis of faith when his parents divorced, became an atheist, but was still like church was his job. He was a deacon, or yeah, I think so. I think that's what it was. So he kept attending church and like faked it for 2 years before he told his wife. was very difficult for him, but he eventually came back to God through science and through mysticism.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually just published a book called Finding God in the Waves that we're about half through. It's really good. But yeah, if you get a chance, you can listen to Pete Holmes interview him or listen to the liturgists. He also has a podcast he does by himself called Ask Science Mike, where he just answers questions about science and faith.
That's cool.
So yeah, so that's been really good for us.
Yeah.
Obviously, I started listening to you guys. The other one I listened to is called Drunk Ex-Pastors.
Oh, really?
And it's these two pastors who are really good friends. Used to be conservative pastors. One is now Catholic. One's an agnostic, and they're just funny. Like, they honestly, a lot of times they don't even talk about religion that much. They're just really funny. My wife doesn't like that much, but I really like it. Yeah. So yeah, podcasts have been really good. I mean, they're kind of like the new church in some ways, you know. I mean, you can sort of belong to this group that, you know, hears the same thing every week. And
yeah, I think there's something to being like a fan and and like an attendee of a religion. But yeah, I totally agree. You have like a commonality of experience and something to kind of keep, something to talk about, something to think about. I listened to a couple episodes of the science or the liturgists, and really enjoyed it. I want to. My wife is actually a scientist, so I want to kind of tell her about it too. But and I think what you mentioned as far as through mysticism, I think that's probably what a lot of people may start to work towards. The Pete Holmes interview with Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan friar, is phenomenal, and his books are very good and a very different expression of Christianity than what
my wife really likes him. I've tried to read some of his stuff. It's very dense.
Yeah, it can be. You got to be in a certain mindset to absorb.
It's not an easy read. But I've listened to. I do enjoy his interviews, though.
Yeah, his interviews are good. He, but he talks about like the false self and the true self and all these things.
Yeah.
That, depending on which book you're reading, that when you kind of have to dive in and just hope that the terminology begins to reveal itself to you. but yeah, it's I think that mysticism, those sort of mystic traditions, have been very untapped, especially within evangelical circles, and as people begin to sort of explore outside of it, I think it'll be a more validated sort of tradition than what we've seen in the past. I don't know if there's anything else you might want to talk about, especially in relation to both either the sort of church drama that you saw and were a part of, or this more personal thread that you have with your family. Or if you kind of have said your piece, I'm totally happy to kind of leave it at that.
There's not a whole lot more to say. I mean, I definitely feel like the experiences have changed me. I mean, my wife does too, but she says, you know, you're not as trusting as you used to be. I'm like, oh, I'm not. I mean, once you've been burned, I mean, you can't undo that. I mean, and I do think of myself as a pretty cynical person. I've always kind of been that way, although that kind of weirdly got put on hold during my 10 years as a Christian. But I mean, I still am. A lot of people see it as a bad thing. I don't. I mean, I can still trust people. I can still, you know, I can still believe that good things will happen, even if, you know, part of me is kind of rolling my eyes even as I'm saying it. There is one thing I'd like to mention. So talking about the book I was reading by Science Mike, he talks about having different sections of your brain. He loves to talk about neuroscience. He actually mentioned epilepsy, funnily enough. He's talking about how early treatments of severe epilepsy involve severing the connection between the two halves of the brain.
Yeah.
and it worked, but it also led to this thing. What is it? Phantom hand syndrome or something like that. Basically, this one patient was going to give his wife a hug with his right hand, and he punched her with his left hand. Did not want to punch her, but it just happened. And they're like, okay, maybe we should investigate this. And they could find that patients who had had this treatment had a much clearer separation, to the point where they could somehow they set it up so they were asking them these questions, and they could only what was it? I'm probably explaining this badly. They were somehow targeting the question toward one half of the brain by making it so that only one eye could see the person asking the question. I think I have that right, because the eyes are wired up to different sections of the brain, and then people who had this treatment would respond very differently, like to the point where one half of the brain handles speech. So they would they would ask the question to the other half, and so they couldn't speak and answer because the part of the brain handle speaking wasn't engaged. So they gave them Scrabble tiles to sort of spell out. So they're spelling out answers, and they ask this person, what do you want to do with your life? And one half of the part that could talk said, something, pretty commonplace, like, I want to be, I don't know, an accountant or something. And then the other half of the Scrabble title spells out automobile racer.
Wow.
So there's this much clearer separation in the people who've had this treatment. So it's just interesting because, like I said, I feel like I'm an atheist and a theist, and that really resonates with me. I'm like, that makes sense. Finally, that makes sense. And like, I can be a cynic and I can be hopeful too, is what it comes down to. I can hope that if I've met people since all this has happened that remind me of my father-in-law, just like so happy and cheerful. And part of me is like, okay, watch out for this person because you know what happened last time. And then the other part of me is like, yeah, but we just met this person. Who knows? Like, and it hasn't been anybody really close to me so far, so haven't really tested that. But I can sort of still be hopeful that, okay, they're not going to be like him, and yet still tread carefully. It's not all one or the other.
So outside of the trust issue, which is a very large issue and affects a huge part of your life and the way you approach people,
right?
How with the way you sort of see yourself now in this sort of in-between space of being agnostic, how else does that sort of affect your view of people, your view of the world, and how is that different than when you identified as a Christian?
That's a good question. The funny thing was, even though, I am cynical, I mean, in a weird way, I'm a lot less cynical because when you're an evangelical, you're told that the whole world is bad and as a default state doomed to hell. And that, you kind of have to help push people that way or else, bad things will happen. So, I mean, I'm a lot more positive in the way I look at the world now. Like, I don't have to view every person I meet as like a project. I mean, like I said, I was never really into the whole witnessing thing, but I felt a lot of guilt about that because, again, it was the same thing as when I was a Catholic. I couldn't just say like, well, I'm going to go to church and write my donation check and, attend small group, read the Bible, and call it a day. I had to try and do everything. And, I mean, not having that now, it's way more peaceful, obviously. I mean, I can just view people as people. Mm-hmm. I mean, I if I find out that someone is an evangelical, I mean, that obviously I'm gonna have a biased view of them. I mean, I can't not. But I mean, like I said, our closest friends right now go to an evangelical church. That sounds kind of bad. It sounds like when people say, "Oh, I have a lot of friends that are black," but but I mean, I like them. I mean, I'm not going to talk about religion with them. I just don't feel the need to engage on that. I mean, my wife did at one point try to get me to come to a Bible study with them. She's like, well, you have a really interesting point of view. And I'm like, well, yeah, but it's not my job to share it with people that I don't, well, of course I have a blog, so that kind of negates that. But if I'm going to share it, that's how I'm going to share it. It's going to be online, anonymous, and if I get any hate about it, I can just ignore it. I've actually gotten a surprisingly small amount considering the stuff I write about. But yeah, I'm an introvert, so that's part of it. I'm not going to go to a Bible study with a bunch of evangelicals and talk about religion. That just sounds horrible, and not because they're horrible people, but I find now when I talk about religion, I get angry very quickly, and I start being sarcastic and nasty, and I don't like that, and I don't want my friends to have to be exposed to that. So why am I going to do that? Really, it's just going to end badly for all involved.
Yeah, that's a very self-aware. That's a very self-aware thing to, to be conscious of.
Yeah. So I mean, I will dodge the topic, and I mean, I actually carpooled during the past year with a friend from my old church who's still very much in the evangelical mindset. Very nice guy. We're both writers. We talk about writing a lot, and like I of course. It's like I have a superpower now because I can tell when he's trying to steer the conversation toward that, and I wouldn't let him. I would just purposefully not take the bait every time. Like, my wife said, "Well, why do you do that? He's your friend." I'm like, well, the way I look at it, I do it because he's my friend. Like, I don't deal with conflict well. I really don't deal with conflict well with my friends. I don't need to have a deep religious discussion with every friend that I have. I can have friends who are like my close personal friends that I talk about this stuff with, and I can have rings outside of that. And he's my friend I talk to about writing on the way from and to work, and that's fine with me. That's just how I am. She doesn't see it that way, but that's sort of the way. That's sort of the way I see it.
That's totally fair. You don't. Whenever you shift from talking about football to something you heard at small group, then talk about football.
Yeah. Yep. In a weird way, it has made me a lot more positive just about humanity in general. Like, we're not just this hopeless, evil mess that needs, a supernatural power to pull us out of it. I mean,
so it's made you more. I mean, to put a label on it, it's made you more. It's given you some more humanism or human.
Yes, that's exactly it. I mean, obviously, you can just. I was going to say open a newspaper, but nobody does that. You can go to Google News and find 10 examples any day to counteract that statement. I get that, but again, it's the two mindsets at once. I have more hope for humanity now, even though I can see like, oh God, like it's not going to be easy, But yeah. I mean, I don't think that we're going to have to get rid of religion completely to do that. I don't think that. I think we're going to have to get rid of some of the ideas that come along with certain religions. But
yeah, and it's okay to have a complicated relationship with these things.
Exactly. Yeah.
To be able to critique something and still be still have some sort of leaning towards it, or wanting something. It's okay to feel complicated and conflicted.
Yeah.
It's okay to feel conflicted too. So, did you have anything else you wanted to touch on at all? I feel like we got a really good sense of this part of your story, this part of your life, and I'm really thankful you were able to talk today, especially on a Sunday. I don't know if you're a football fan, but I mean, this is a Sunday we're talking.
No, well, I appreciate your sacrifice. Then I'm not a sports person. I'm a software engineer. I pick last for gym class every time. So
no, I'm a very fair weather sports fan. So
I do root for the Red Sox. Got to root for the Red Sox, but
yeah.
And honestly, even if I wanted to, I don't have time to watch sports anymore.
Yeah. I'm a Cubs fan, so we stole your guy. We stole Theo, but you know what? If he can work his magic against our curse, then
yeah. I no, when it was looking, what was that one year? It looks like it was going to be a Cubs Red Sox World Series. That was
yeah.
Was that the first year Boston won? I think it was.
It might have been, yeah. It was 2007.
I was a true Boston fan. I doubted until the last out of the last game. That was one of the few times I've watched sports.
Yeah, that's just strategigic, though. Talking as a Cubs fan.
That was the first time I watched baseball since. Yeah. So I didn't even, the infamous Bill Buckner thing. I didn't see that. I was 7 when that happened. I didn't care about sports. My father never did either. But I heard about it, and the last out was of the game before the World Series, like a ground ball to the first base. I was like, oh God, don't let it go between your legs. Don't let it go between your legs. I mean, when they won the first game of the ALCS that year after losing 3-8, I was mad. I was like, just lose so we can just go home and get this over with. What are you doing? And then they won game 2. It was like, what? No, stop. And then game 3, and I was like, well, no one's ever done it before, but they only have to win one more. And then they won another one. Then I was like, oh, great, now they're going to lose the World Series. Thanks a lot. But
well, there's that conflict within belief and disbelief. And all.
Yeah, exactly. yeah, that's a good point. Oh.
Yeah. We have I grew up in Indiana, but we have some old family friends that are Yankee fans because there are Yankee fans everywhere. It's
of course,
but anyways, it was like my parents' friends that have been lifelong friends or whatever, and so they were hopeful for another feather in their cap that year, and then it was my dad's friend. It was like a husband and wife, friends for my parents, and the husband had to preemptively email everyone after Boston came back and beat them in the ALCS, and then it was just called I know. It was like, do not talk to me. That was his approach about it all.
Yeah,
but yeah. Anyways, we're hoping to get some of that Theo Epstein magic.
Yeah,
this
year.
I
wish you luck.
But thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people find you online?
At heretichusband.com and at Heretic Husband on Twitter. I do also have a Tumblr, which is actually not religion. It's more pop culture. heretichusband.tumblr.com. But I do have a Facebook page as Heretic Husband, but I don't really post there a lot.
Gotcha.
But yeah, that's where people can find me.
Well, great. Thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Just a minute.